Well, here we have the FX5 killer, the Canon C70. Well, obviously this video is a little bit tongue-in-cheek because the FX5 is obviously a better camera than the C70. But what I would like to discuss today is how much better is the FX5 than the C70, because this camera came out 5 years ago and the FX5 is the latest and greatest 2026 camera. How far have we come? And really, as far as a real world application using a camera, is the FX5 light years ahead of the C70? And I'm going to put up a kind of an argument that the C70 in a lot of ways is still a better camera than the FX5, even though in some areas the FX5 obviously has some technologies in it that are far superior to the C70. So let's start this little list. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the DGO sensor, because the DGO sensor in these cameras is something that is kind of not common in a lot of the lower end cameras or those type of prosumer or the lower professional type cameras. And as we know with the C70, this camera is kind of been a bit of a cult camera because of the DGO sensor and the image that comes out of this camera. And a lot of people really, really like it. And that's why this camera has really got a good reputation. It's mostly because the image out of it is the sensors from the C300, and it produces amazing image using this DGO sensor. So that is something it has in common with the FX5, which, as I said, a lot of the other cameras, they just don't offer, right? So when we look at the C70, we're getting that similar feature, and we're also getting that pristine image in both of these cameras. So that is something that the FX5, I really like that Sony's put that in their cameras, because I think that when it comes to image quality, it's a feature that does actually work very, very well. And it's not about just the dynamic range. It's something just about the way the image looks. It has a really natural look to it, and it's just really, really nice. It doesn't have such a clinical look to it, like a more video look to it. It has a much more filmic look to it. Well, as I said, I haven't got the FX5 here. I've got the C70, and I do know this camera does give that look. Like when you actually crank the ISO and you get the noise in the image, it kind of doesn't look that bad. It actually looks like quite nice. It looks kind of like film. So this is one of the advantages. The image, but with those DGO sensors, there's something just a little bit extra with them, and that is something that we're both getting in both of these cameras. That is a super really good thing, because it's the image. Now, the really obvious thing that's different is the C70 is a crop censored camera. So basically it's like an APS-C camera. It's a Super 35, whilst the Sony FX5 is a full frame camera. Now, that to me has its pros and cons. Now, this is my second C70, and I've got another one. I'm filming it on the C70. And what I've found is that even though I was a little bit tentative of buying a crop sensor camera, the C70, like I've been sort of looking at this camera for years, and it took me years to buy it. And when I bought it, I actually are finding that buying lenses for this camera, because they're S35 lenses, especially cine lenses, the cost is significantly less than full frame lenses. So you can buy a lens that is much cheaper. Like you can buy like kind of budget lenses for like $500, and they're not bad, you know. Whilst full frame, you just can't. You're looking at twice as much for something that's the same, or maybe even a little bit more that's similar. So the package of the camera, if you say that, look, I'm buying this as a cinema camera and I'm going to use cine lenses on it, the overall package with your lens and camera is going to be significantly less in the total price. If you look at it like that, like if you buy the FX5 and you're going to have to put full frame lenses on it and you want something of a similar value, your lenses are going to be more expensive, even though this has the RF mount, which has some limitations. But funnily enough, the budget lenses that have the RF mount are actually cheaper than the ones that have like PL and all the more common lenses in the cinema line. So that's kind of worked out to be a bonus. Now, the other thing that I've also found with the C70, this one has this is a 35mm RF lens, but the one that I'm filming on right here has the 16mm 2.8 lens on it. And that lens, I used to use it on my Canon R3, and to be quite honest, I didn't really love this lens because the way that it distorts the image on the sides was kind of, it wasn't that pleasing, and I used to use it, but there wasn't another fairly cost-effective option. You can buy, there is a zoom lens out now that goes from, I think, 15 to 35, a now lens, but it's insane expensive. So I didn't really want to buy that. Plus, I'm not really a fan of zoom lenses. So I kept using this lens. But then when I popped it on the C70, right, because it crops in and the lens works out to be about 24mm, the quality of the lens, because it's cutting out a lot of this distortion and parts of the lens that are not so crash hot, it focuses on the middle. The lens performs a hell of a lot better. Looks like really good, right? And this is also something else. So you can buy full frame lenses that maybe are not that crash hot, and you can put them on to this Canon C70, and even EF mounts is very, very common with an adapter. And you can kind of get a higher quality image from a cheaper lens. So when we look at lens choices, in the whole scheme of things, because lenses are a significant cost, the Canon C70 can win quite a lot. And then we actually look at the cost of the cameras, right? The cost of the cameras is this Canon C70, it's sort of hovering around these days now, just slightly more than the C50, round about the same price. You can get them for maybe, you spend like a few hundred more, but they're very, very similar price. So if you look at that compared to the FX5 and you want the top handle or the EVF or whatever, it's kind of half the price of the FX5s. And Canon do include a top handle and a little microphone mount, right? And I really like this microphone mount. It's very well made, and I just use it like this, and it's really cool. Just pops on the top of the camera, works beautifully. And now we're talking about sound. We also have everything on board this camera. So we have 4 channels on the side. And even though it hasn't got 32-bit float available, you can use multiple channels and have a lower channel and a higher channel, so you protect your clipping on your sound. So the solutions are there, whilst with the FX5, you need to have the top handle to get the 32-bit float, and all the connections are on the top handle. And I must admit, I'm not a fan of that design. I like everything on the body, and this body style, whether you kind of like it or not, is a complete camera. It has the ND filters, it has the sound, it has everything on board, right? So you just whack a lens on it, and you whack on a little microphone like this, and you're good to go. I like the form factor. I know some people don't, and it has its disadvantages. It's a little bit harder to balance if you want to rig it out. And also on gimbals, you need to have a more pro type gimbal, a bigger gimbal, because the arm length, it won't allow your tilting because it will hit the arm. So this is where the FX5 is a massive advantage. If you use a lot of gimbal work, the smaller cameras like the 350 and the FX5 are advantageous. But on the other side is you don't get the ND filters. You've got to go back to using ND filters. And if you want to use wide angle lenses that have got a domed front, well, then you're buggered, right? The other thing that I also like about the C70 is that when you turn the camera off, it actually shuts the ND filter over the sensor. So the sensor's actually protected at all times when you turn the camera off. It's like the Canon cameras, the hybrids that have the shutter that closes to protect the lens. So that is a nice little handy thing and keeps your sensor a lot cleaner, and you don't get so much crap on your lens, which is a pain with some of the cameras. So that's one thing that's really good. Now, they all do RAW and they all do, your compressed formats and all that sort of stuff. And one of the big advantages with the new Sony FX5 is the RAW functions are very small, and that is a massive advantage if you are a person who wants to shoot a lot of RAW, because if you shoot the RAW on one of these, the files are going to be a bit bigger, not a lot bigger. It's still very usable, but the Sony files are not much smaller, but they are smaller, which save you space. But talking about file size, the one thing that I really like about this C70 camera that I didn't actually realize when I first bought it, but but my mind's still trying to comprehend it, right? It's like blown away, is that I use this camera for making social media, like talking head contents and stuff like that, and I just want to like quickly make something, and I just want to get it on my iPad, throw it up in my editor quickly, and put it on social media. And I don't want to have massive files. I want to have 20 gigabyte files and all this sort of stuff, which I do get if I make a 10-minute video. Normally it's close to 20 gigs. If I shoot in all eye on my R3s, my hybrid cameras, it's like 15 to 20 gigs, right? It's massive. And that's only in 1080p. So the file sizes are huge to work with, and they just fill up everything because you're making so much content all the time. Whilst with this C70 camera, I can shoot in 1080p, C-Log 2, 10-bit, HEVC, and it's 50 megapixels per second. And the image looks insane, and that's with the DGO sensor on. And the file sizes are just, for 10 minutes, just like a few gigs. They're insane small. And if you're just doing like a minute video reel, or a minute or 2 minutes, it's usually well under a gigabyte. And you can just use V30 cards, so the cheapest chips cards, and you can make social media content like till the cows come home, cost you peanuts. And we've also got the mount on the side, and I just chuck a little Arca Swiss on the bottom here, and just can whack it on my tripod, and I'm good to go. And the screen on the camera, we can also rotate that, so we can have all of our information is horizontal. This camera here is built for upright video. Even 5 years ago, they very much designed it for that application. Now, the other things as well is frame rates, and the new Sony FX5, even though it's saying it's like next year, they're saying they're going to, so it's a promise from Sony. They're going to be offering 240 frames per second. Now, I have used those high frame rates, and I like to use them for my weddings when you drop the perfume and it just sort of like floats down onto the bed. And it does have its application, those high frame rates, and the image is great out of my R3 for that, and I shoot in 1080p. But the Sony FX5 does it in 4K. And look, I mean, if you shoot a lot of slow motion, absolutely beats the C70. The maximum we can get out of this is 180. And I don't know why, but on mine, I can't get it to do it with the autofocus at 180. I'm not too sure why. I can't. Maybe I've got the wrong settings in there, but apparently you're supposed to be able to. But even if you can, it still falls short of the frame rate, and it also crops into Super 16. So that's a pain. So the FX5, definitely with the newer technology, kicks the C70's ass right out of the park, right? Now, the other thing that some people may see as a pro, but I see it as a con, and I'll explain why, is that this sensor here is an 8.83 megapixel sensor, which in today's language is like teeny weeny, right? But the FX5, I think, is 16 megapixels, so twice as much, and it's a 5K sensor, right? Now, the reason why for me anyway, having those bigger sensors for me is actually a disadvantage, and that's the reason why that I've moved to these type of cameras from my R3, because the Canon R3 has a 24 megapixel sensor, and you go, oh yeah, great, and I use it for photos as well. But it makes the file sizes bigger. It means that the camera has to do more processing to basically oversample it down to 1080p and smaller frame rates. Even 4K, it has to oversample it down, right? And that takes processing power in the cameras. It creates overheating. It makes the files bigger. It makes the whole throughput system of your card, from your sensor to your cards to your computer, it makes everything much more to work with, much more bigger files. And you might go, yeah, but you're getting better quality because you're getting more resolution and so forth. But the reality is, and I've found that I've made tens of thousands of videos for social media and done lots and lots of tests, is that the problem is that the cameras we have today, these cameras are insane good. Like, all the brands are insane good, right? The image quality is like, even out of these cheaper cameras, right? The image quality is insane. And the real issue is not the cameras, it's the viewing medium. And the viewing medium is generally on a phone or some sort of mobile device, like a tablet, like an iPad. Some people watch it on computers, but that is becoming less and less. Most people watch on these mobile devices. And it's via social media. It's streamed to the laptops and the phones, and the bitrate size and the resolution size is quite small. Like, all upright video, there's not one app that is more than 1080p. And in general, most of the download speed is single digits, right? Especially if it's cellular, like you're not at home on your Wi-Fi. You may have higher speeds at home. But even if you go on YouTube, generally you're not getting more than 50 megabits per second max. It's quite small. Whilst these cameras, I mean, okay, this one can shoot at 50 megabits per second, but most of the new cameras are shooting hundreds. So you're not transitioning that quality into the viewing medium for the client, because the compression and the reduction in resolution is so massive. It's massive, right? We're talking more than a factor of 10, right? And I don't see the point in shooting in these high resolutions and high bit rates and RAW if it's going to end up on social media. Obviously, if you're doing stuff for high-end commercials and production stuff, or you're making something that's going to end up on Netflix or in a cinema, then that's a completely different story. But generally, these sorts of cameras may not be used for that sort of application. Maybe using some more expensive type cameras. But for my application, this camera for social media is an absolutely content creator beast, because the file sizes are so small. I can use cheap media. I can manage heaps of files. I can shoot heaps and heaps of files with hardly any size whatsoever. So that is one thing that this camera like whips, absolutely whips most of the cameras on the market, because the file sizes are small and the quality of the files is it kind of screws with your head a bit, because you can't comprehend how a file that's 50 megabits per second is so good. And that is in 50 frames per second. That's like, I can shoot that in 50 frames. Even at 100 frames per second, it's still 50 megabits per second in 1080p. They're absolutely tiny, and they look amazing. So if media and you want to process a lot of stuff and you want your files to be small, I don't think there's hardly any camera that comes close to this thing. It's like in quality and file sizes, there's nothing that I'm aware of on the market that even comes close. It's an absolute beast, right? So that's one thing that I really like about the C70. Now, the other thing that we need to look at is ergonomics, because this sort of body style has its advantages and disadvantages, and the same with the FX5. It has advantages and disadvantages. Now, I prefer the bigger camera. See the way I'm holding it like a hybrid camera. I love the feel of the way it feels in the hand. To me, it feels like a glove. It has how many? I think 13 buttons that you can customize on this camera. I like the buttons. I like to be able to quickly get into the menus. I I also like the battery life. Now this is just the smallest battery for this camera. You can buy a six. This is a 30 BP30. You can buy a 60 and a 90. So you can have 3 times the capacity of a what's it called, a BP A30, and this A30 lasts for 3 hours. So in theory, if I buy a 90, I could basically shoot for like 12 hours without changing the battery. And there's another reason why I like this camera. I can set it in the corner, and I use it for behind the scenes and just let it run in 1080p, 50 megabits per second, and it just runs. And it uses hardly any space. The files are small, and it just runs. It like you don't have to worry about battery running out or anything like that. Like it just gets the job done, right? Whilst when you go to the smaller bodies, yes, you have the advantage of being more compact, and for certain applications, they can fit onto gimbals much better. But the battery life in a lot of these like hybrid mirrorless style bodies is pretty lacking. So then you need to go out and you need to buy lots and lots of batteries for them. You know, I've heard of some people who shoot Sony for weddings, and they have like 10 batteries, like because you know their battery anxiety is through the roof. So I like to have a camera I can pick up and it kind of gets the job done, right? Now, we all agree, including me, the FX5 is going to do some of those things better, and it does. There's no there's no argument. Like the other factor you got to bring into consideration is low light. Now, the FX5 has a 3 base ISO. Okay, so the 3 base ISO gives you fantastic low light performance, whilst this one doesn't have anything like that. This camera was invented before like dual base and triple base ISO, you know, even was in someone's head. So the C70, you know, is obviously at a massive disadvantage. Now, I have been playing around with higher ISOs, and you can kind of get usable footages at higher ISOs, but you have to make sure that you push the exposure. It is achievable, but obviously it's not in the same league as the FX5, which has got these dual base ISOs and going to produce a cleaner image at 12,800. And obviously that's a disadvantage, and I know how good that is because I do weddings, and my R3s 12,800, they're insane good, like for low light. 100 frames per second, 1080p, 12,800 images, like blows your mind. But so that is a big advantage. Now, that's lacking here, absolutely lacking. Like you don't get it. But if you switch the FX5 into the DGO mode, then it's locked at a single base ISO, which is 800. So then it's basically in the same ballpark as the C70. So if you want to use a DGO and you want to use that mostly for filming, then the playing field has been leveled and it's just the same as a C70 5-year-old camera again. All right. Now, the other thing that I really like about the C70, which is kind of a pro and a con, right, compared to the FX5, is the screen. Now, the screen on the C70 is extremely detailed, and it's really good when you're using manual lenses. Like you don't even really need a monitor. You can punch in and you can hit focus really well. Like you can put your peaking on, or if you're using a proprietary lens, you can use a little box there which has the little dials that tell you which way to turn the ring, and you can get the focus really well because the screen is so detailed and such a good screen. But on the negative side is that even though the screen's really good, the mechanics of the hinge here, this part here, right? As we know, with anyone's a C70 owner, that this is a weak spot, and you need to treat the screen really carefully because the hinges wear and the screws inside come loose, and then you get this like this screen that kind of like sags and falls. So that is something that is a little bit negative on the newer ones, which is a brand new one, and the new C80. They have improved that, but I still have heard with if you kind of don't treat them nicely, they can still have that issue. So that's a basically a hardware problem that's a bit of an issue. Now, with the C70, one thing I like with this camera is it kind of does everything, right? You get 4-channel sound. It's got all of the exposure tools, which I think exposure tools are extremely important with video, because if you want to get the absolutely ultimate best image, your exposure needs to be as close as possible as you possibly can get it. And then you can kind of really get that perfect image. If you're a bit off, yeah, you can still make the image look reasonable, but you never can get quite as much juice out of it. Now, the FX5 had false color and waveform and all these tools put on it, but they kind of semi-crippled it because you can't change the functions whilst recording. And that's one thing I really, really like about the C70. You can change all of your tools and exposures whilst recording. You can magnify, you can not magnify, you can put on your exposure tools, turn off your exposure tools. Actually, the Lumix cameras do that too, and it's like really fantastic because you can check things whilst you're recording, and you don't have to interrupt it. Whilst with my R3s, it's the same. You have to interrupt. If you want to look at exposure tools, you have to interrupt the recording. You can't magnify. You can't do all this sort of stuff to check your manual focus or anything like that. So that is a bit of a win with the C70. Now, so that's pretty much all of my comparisons here. So there's pros and there's cons, but the pros and cons come in kind of different buckets. So, the C70 is a much, much cheaper camera. You get the top handle, you get the microphone hole, you got all these bits and pieces. You get the box, and it's kind of like everything's in the box ready to go. And you get the ND filters, and you get all of the functionality. It has kind of almost all of the same stuff as the FX5, except for the dual base ISO, right? So, but everything else is there. Now, the only difference really with the FX5 is some of those things are better, and one of those things is the autofocus. The C70, unfortunately, because it was designed 5 years ago, has 5-year-old autofocus. It kind of works, but for some reason, which I find quite weird, is that the gain setting on the sensor somehow is related to the way the autofocus works. They're kind of linked, right? So you can have your autofocus on, like now, it's focused on me. If I turn the exposure down, it'll lose focus. And then I can turn the exposure up and it'll grab focus again. And I haven't even changed any lights. Like nothing's changed in the scene at all. So the Sony FX5 100% autofocus is going to be better than the C70. That's just like, it just is, right? And that's an advantage. So if autofocus is really, really important and you want to rely on that, I think that's a big thing. But I think if you're manning this camera and you want to use autofocus, it's not such a big deal because you can lock it. It has this feature, like which I'm using now. If I go out of scene, it won't jump to the back. And if I come back in, it'll just capture me again. So it looks kind of professional. I'm not too sure. I don't think the SF5 has that feature, which is pretty cool. So it has some advantages, and you sort of got to set up the autofocus right in the C70 to get the most out. And there's been some software updates that have improved it. But that is one thing that is a disadvantage. But if you're going to use cine lenses on any of these two cameras, then the autofocus obviously then doesn't become really an advantage because they don't have autofocus. They're all manual. So you have to use motors and so forth like that. And you've got to pull focus or use some sort of LiDAR or other type of feature to drive those lenses. But that's it, guys. That's my comparison. But the point that I'm really trying to point out here is that this is a 5-year-old camera. The FX5 is a camera that's hasn't been out a month yet, right? And if you really look at it, how far have we come in 5 years? And I think in video, not to the same degree as we've come with still cameras. The still cameras, like all of these like extra feature things like autofocus and so forth, like have really, really improved. But with video, the problem is the through processing, and I think this is limiting the cameras and the cards and the whole throughput, and that's why I think we're going the wrong way with a lot of these cameras. And I think we should be looking more at smaller sensors, because of all the popular video cameras that have done really well, like this one and the A7S III and the FX3, they have small sensors. They have low resolution sensors, so the through process is much better, and you can have higher grade images because there's not as much to process, and you can have high frame rates and all of the other like goodies that we like to have. And I think that cameras like this, the C70, that's why they're still very competitive in 2026 and at a lesser price, and they give you all of the goodies on board the camera. Anyway, guys, that's where I'm going to leave it, and I will see you next vid.